people don't want to admit it, but humans are aesthetic creatures. People say, "Oh, I just care about function." It's just not true.
What is something you wish customers knew about your design?
The number of things that are thought of, if you say, "Why is this way?" There's an answer. Why is this contour there? There's an answer. I'm telling you, everything about that knife has an answer.
So what do you think is the message Joe, as a designer, wants to communicate with the world?
Oh, wow. Now here's a question for you. Wow.
Today, we're getting carried away with Joe Caswell. He's one of the most innovative knife designers whose work I've had the pleasure of experiencing. You might be familiar with his smash hit Morphing Karambit design, the CRKT Provoke, which I named most innovative at SHOT Show a couple years back. In this episode, Joe drops some serious knowledge about the engineering, science, art, and joy of design. Joe also shares his design process and philosophy, what differentiates a good knife from a great one, why materials matter but don't tell the whole story, and just so much more insight from his decades of experience. All right, enough of me yapping. Let's get into the episode. What's up, everyone? Welcome to Carry the Way, the weekly podcast where we nerd out about all things EDC gear and maybe try to teach you a thing or two while we're at it. I'm Bernard, the founder of everydaycarry.com, and I'm joined by our editor, Mikey.
Hey, what's up?
Yeah, and Mikey's great and all, but we're also joined by Joe Caswell. And if you're unfamiliar with Joe, he's an American inventor and knife designer who's been making knives and EDC gear for almost 30 years. If you've ever seen the Morphing Karambit, most famously in the CRKT Provoke series, Joe invented that. And besides designing knives, Joe has passion and expertise in a whole bunch of cool domains like motorcycle journalism, competitive fencing, shooting sports, and more. So, Joe, super honored to have you on. Welcome to Carry the Way.
Oh, thanks. My pleasure. It's a privilege.
Can we ask what knife you're carrying on you today?
Well, this moment, I just have a bunch of stuff, old stuff right here from the old days in case I need to refer to something. But
old is gold. Yeah.
What's that? Old. I know. The funny thing is I don't have a whole lot of my old stuff. I have one or two things. But in honor of EDC, one of the first things I had done that wasn't pattern welded, because I had done pattern welding for many years before designing pocket knives and things like that, was this model from 2005, the EDC is what we called it. And it was the first one that had this style, this little clip that would pop up like this. And it would fit in your pocket let's see if I can even show it. It was kind of different, in the day. And let's see. There we go. See? Like that.
Nice. And we can throw footage on there. We can have Gabe jump in with some B-roll.
Cool. Yeah.
That transitioned into the EDX.
It did. That gave way. The very next one was EDX, and it made it put the clip on the same plane, but from the other direction. And this was automatic. So this one goes away when the blade is out. It actually is. It is a lock bar. It's all one piece. So really, this knife doesn't have too many parts in it. It's and it was funny when I was first showing this is 2010, 2009ish. There was a lot of speculation as to how it worked, and they had some people had taken some stuff off the internet that I had in my promo stuff and tried to reverse engineer it from that, and they figured there were gears and all this stuff, and it's not. It's very, very simple, very straightforward, and but the lock bar and the clip are one piece in this case, and
right,
and it.
And it's in the scale, and it's just disappears when you don't need it, or when it's actually deployed, but then it becomes the pocket clip when it's closed. Yeah, exactly. So for the people who have not seen your designs, I mean this in the nicest way, but you're insane. That's crazy. I don't know who would even think of doing that, but that's why I think your designs are so cool and so fun. And then, I mentioned in the intro, you did the Morphing Karambit. This is the EDC version. And for people who are following everydaycarry.com, you might recognize this particular knife because a couple of years ago at SHOT Show, I saw this and I awarded you the most innovative design award there because I was so intrigued by how this worked. And it's very cool. And that ended up also kind of going viral on TikTok and Instagram and stuff. People were super into that. So yeah, just a glimpse of your designs. They're so unique, so interesting. And I'm just very curious about how you even approach this kind of stuff.
I'm also curious, why a Karambit specifically? Do you have any background in the martial arts that uses it, or was it specifically because of these pods, the way you designed it? Why a Karambit specifically?
Well, that's a great story. the Karambit in particular actually came from my experience doing shooting sports, but mostly combatives, like a defensive handgun and this sort of thing. And this goes back. I've been doing that stuff 14 years, 15 years, and there was some nexus between the training outfit that I was affiliated with and the police and military in the area. And sometimes they'd be doing stuff on the base, and sometimes it'd be police related things. So there's a lot of interaction with some soldiers, but also SWAT and these guys. So these guys were about 5-6 years ago, maybe more than that now, actually more like 6-7 years ago. The Karambit started to become popular in that space. And at the time, I didn't have a whole lot of experience with it personally. It doesn't come from my own martial arts background. But I was observing how they were using it and their enthusiasm for it, and how they were using it, what they liked about the Karambit platform and what they disliked, more importantly. And those guys were training away from like a wave kind of opening in their view, because it was not 100%. It was like 89%, something like that, unless you really practice it. That was their view. But the more importantly,
Joe, really quick. Sorry. Yes. Can we maybe, for the listeners who are like not watching this, kind of explain what a Karambit is and a wave opening? Yeah. Sure.
Well, a Karambit is a style of knife. Traditionally, it's a fixed blade. It's characterized by a prominent ring, kind of at the base of the knife, at the pommel area, and then also a usually curved, short-ish blade relative to the handle. That if you were holding it in what's commonly called a reverse grip, the blade points towards the direction of your knuckles. It points away from you, so it's not really optimized as a stabbing kind of action. It's more of a cutting thing. Now the Karambit traditionally is from like Indonesian, I believe.
Indonesia, yeah.
And it was a utility blade that was sort of made its way into the martial arts in the area, and that's really what it's associated with more than its utility, which has been an area I find kind of interesting, because a lot of people, when we came up with the Provoke, like it and bought it because of its unique action and it's those sorts of things. But gratifyingly, that they discovered that it's actually a pretty good utility tool. I mean, overall, as a general utility knife, it makes a great ADC, and it's amazing when I see them in the wild, to encounter people, and it's like, they thought they'd get it just to show their buddies and have a cool thing, and then they realize, wow, it's actually a useful tool. In fact, there was one guy at a USN show once who was there, who was a maker of traditional knives, camp knives, bowies, that sort of thing. And he comes up to me, he's got his hat on, and he says, he looks kind of both ways and says, don't tell anybody, but I carry one of those every day on the ranch. just for utility, cutting this, bales, doing whatever they're doing. But I thought that was pretty fun. But what this started, this kind of form started showing up in a folding form. Emerson, of course, is one of the most prominent ones to bring out. Fox has tons of versions of the folding Karambit. Yep. And they're all very good. One of these guys, once, you have to kind of get this, is kind of a weird story. Standing on the range, these guys are standing around. They've got some machine guns, they've got all their kit, and they know I'm a knife guy, so they're showing me their Karambits, and I'm kind of new to it. I'm learning what they like and what they don't like. And I don't recall the brand. It was beautiful. That was a nice little Karambit, and it was very thin, I remember. And I was just kind of talking out loud, thinking, "Oh, that's really cool." And the only thing that I would be concerned about was it was a frame or a liner lock. I don't remember which, but the fact that you're putting your fingers on the lock, considering how this knife can be used with a reverse kind of, and then also you can torsion. If you put torsion in the blade this way, you can cause, if things aren't just perfect, you can cause the frame or the liner to deflect. And and I'm just doing this, and I just kind of, and the thing opens up, and they're like, "Oh my God!" And so that got me thinking about the trajectory of how to do this. How do you go from using this, having this in your hand discreetly, as they might in a situation, and be able to switch without having to take an important support hand, index a blade, and open it, which is what they were training to do, which eliminates a lot. They were training to take the blade out, open it up manually, and there it is. But then you lose a lot of functionality that's inherent in the form. So so those are the two design things. How do you make something that doesn't imperil your fingers in the way this style might be unique? And also, how do you do it? How do you deploy from a fist? How do you go from this and deploy without having to invoke any kind of weird, flicking or other influence? And it took a long time. It was sitting in various forms on my desk. I knew there was something going on with possible parts interacting, and it was a couple of years sitting on my desk while I was doing other projects. And in fact, one of the artifacts of this project is this. It's shown up before. This is a little thing I was playing with. This is the second one. I think I had little tongue depressor popsicle sticks drilled full of holes. And and if you use your imagination, you kind of have to, but you have to imagine the space I'm occupying while I'm doing this stuff. I don't even remember how this thing worked. It's got its little links, there. And it's like, if you use the imagination, you can kind of see how this, might function, and it's like coming up with, just kind of coming up with this and trying to get it in concrete, pull it down from the ether, so to speak, and get something in your hand that you can work off of. And then we came up with a more complicated version, which is often the case of the first version, which was bigger, as you can see, compared with the second version. And it was, this thing's been, there's only one of these that exists. And I showed it at the USN show, and it's been actuated probably thousands of times. But this one actuated not from direct action on the thumb, on the link itself, but from this other component that would sort of, squeeze it out, if that makes sense. And the thing about this, and it's all cool and all, but the manual of arms is a little complicated to take it down. Opening it up is no problem, right? But doing the opposite was kind of, to move this main lock away and then manually close it. And I noticed that most people were struggling with that. In fact, the only people that out of, I don't know, hundreds, many hundreds at the USN show who played with it, who intuitively picked it out without being shown it twice or three times, was Gavin Hawk. And there was this Danish kid, and his kid was some kind of savant. He just kind of came around. He just like intuited it instantly. It was amazing. But other than that, I figured, we have to simplify. And also for manufacturing, we eliminated a number of parts that were essentially unnecessary into the what we call version 2. But it was 12 months of doing nothing between that model and this. Just had to redesign how the lock works, how much of it works. It's also better suited for being used when it's not deployed. It's a little more friendly in that regard. It's smaller, more compact, and there's fewer parts, which is always a plus. Whenever I'm designing stuff, I don't like little screws and complication. I like bigger parts, fewer bigger parts if you can get away with it. And that's that's kind of the way it rolls. Does that answer the question on where it came from?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Oh yeah.
That's really comprehensive. Thank you. I'm curious a little bit about something about the design, because I'm a little bit of a movie nerd. So
Sure.
I just recently, in the past 10 years, I got really into the Raids movie series, and then the second movie of that, one of the main antagonists was using a double Karambit system, and I'm like, oh my god, that's so cool. They're Indonesian performers, they're Indonesian martial artists, and I'm like, it's like really really cool how they're demonstrating the art of the martial art and also using karambits. And I just started I went on a tear. I went through like fox knives, karambits. I went through a whole bunch of them until you started releasing the CRKT ones, and I started collecting those a little bit as well. And just to tie it into the movies, I'm really curious because from this angle, it kind of looks like a Tron light cycle. I don't know if that's kind of a reach. It kind of looks. I've been asked it a couple of times.
Now that you mention it, I kind of see that. I didn't. I've never even thought of that before this moment. But
I just because in this. Yeah, in this color specifically, also it kind of looks like a light cycle from Tron. When it looks like one.
There you go.
I
suppose.
It's
funny.
I just found that really cool.
It sounds like from that the sort of the origin story of like you getting into the karambits, it wasn't like you had much of a personal connection to karambits And even Mikey and I, like, we're from or I'm not from the Philippines. I'm Filipino. Mikey is from the Philippines. But Filipino martial arts heavily uses karambits as well. But it just sounds like that you kind of just noticed this problem that an end user was having, and something in your brain compelled you to, like, I need to solve that.
Right.
Is that kind of
how
that's all exactly your designs go?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I really don't have much interest in doing stuff that's been done, redesigning, just shapes and stuff like this. It just puts me to sleep. If it's the cool thing about knives in particular is that it's a really old art form, right? I mean, it's been around forever, and hundreds of years, if not more, in basically the same form. I mean, there are Roman examples of folding knives, even like Swiss Army kind of things that have like utensils that folded in that form. It's incredible. And so to me, there's a unique challenge built into everything you do, that if you can bring some usefulness into an old art form, you can solve a problem that's ancient or that maybe hasn't been completely addressed, that people just take for granted, that it'll always be there. That's a hard thing to do. If you're coming into a new technology that it's all new, like I don't know, like computer science or something like this. Well, getting patents and doing stuff, that's going to be easy because it's all new. It's fresh territory. This is pretty old territory, and it's all very mechanical. There's not much you can draw on except very simple mechanical interactions and things like this that perhaps they're novel in their application, but some of the principles exist and have existed in other areas. And it's to me, I find it challenging, and which I enjoy the challenge. I'm not interested.
So how do you
in doing stuff?
It's like, has been done. How do you reinvent the wheel without it being a gimmick while still being useful? Pretty much.
Right. Yeah, well, and a lot of times you'll see stuff that people come out with that is novel, but it doesn't really advance the ball. It doesn't send the ball down the field.
Yes.
It's cool, but it doesn't really do anything special. You can't really articulate this has really made this guy's life better or easier. It doesn't really address, or it addresses something minor, but you have to pay a lot to get to it in terms of what you're giving up, like elegance of form and this sort of thing. And
so I have two questions that I want to ask you. But they're both maybe kind of involved. So I'll start with one that's like closest to what we were just talking about. Like you're saying, sometimes people make things, but they don't really, move the ball down the field. That's a sports reference. But so I feel like sometimes we see products that try to solve a problem that just doesn't exist or never existed. But then, with some of your designs or all of your designs, I feel you're solving a problem that not everyone knew was one until you use it. And you're like, oh, this is so much better. Like, I didn't even realize that I needed this. Especially, the example of the Karambit, like you're listening to that feedback and maybe they can't articulate it, but you see it and you work on it and then you come up with that solution. Have you identified just like, since that was so long ago and then like coming like to like the modern age, I guess, of knives now, have you identified any like newly forming kind of under the radar type problems that you're curious about solving that you've seen?
Oh yeah, there's a couple things. There's something I'm working on now that is it's still kind of in the popsicle sticks phase, if that's what they, I mean, I don't have popsicle sticks to show it, but it's at that level. It's like I'm thinking, I guess, and I don't know how long that's going to be. There's another one I just handed off, actually, that it was the previous 4 years since the Karambit, the EDC Karambit. From that point to now, I've been working on something that is that I actually handed off at SHOT this last year, and they were very excited to see it finally. I mean, 4 years is a long time. And I mean, it was 92 iterations in. It was a pretty unexpected item, and it'll get a lot of attention. The interesting thing is, it's a little more niche even to me. It's a little more niche than even the Karambit, which was considered niche at the time. When it came out, everyone thought, well, why would you make something that's appealing to a niche of a niche, which is what the Karambit kind of is, if you think about it. And it's but thankfully it's proven to have a lot more interest than was anticipated, that whole form, which is kind of gratifying. It's coming.
Okay. Sorry, okay. We can edit it out.
Yeah. As I was asking that question, I realized like I probably can't get like a great answer to be shared.
There's something cool coming, and and it'll be unexpected. But it's another one of these items that is that hopefully will be as unexpected as the Karambit, because when the Karambit came out, the Provoke was released. It was kind of unexpected. It kind of came out of nowhere, and nobody was really like you were saying, maybe even asking some of these questions. A lot of people, they receive the forms that they have, and they just work around it. You see this a lot in firearms too. It's like that's just the way it is. So you train around it, and it just doesn't have to be that way all the time. And when it comes to the Provoke, it was kind of a broadside against how you even imagine a knife. If you think about it, it doesn't have two scales with a folding knife with a blade that spins in the middle. It doesn't have little flexures that have to try to be a stop pin, and it really thinks, the industrial design of it thinks not like the same kind of technology we're used to look at. I mean, it's the way it's constructed, the materials used, for instance. I mean, I got a lot of pushback, I remember early on, because the frame that I selected for the original Provoke that we did the Kickstarter on is 7075 aluminum with Type 3 hard anodized. And to this day,
which is more expensive.
Oh yeah, but the thing is, a lot of people are saying, oh, it should be titanium because cool. And titanium is super cool and all, but it's a lot heavier than the aluminum, and it has some strength advantages. But 7075,
it's the best of the best.
Oh yeah, I mean, especially for weight, it's approximately as strong as mild steel, yet it's super light. And when you put the Type 3 hard anodized on it, which you can't get on titanium, it's a actual bearing surface. Things can rub on it legit. And I referenced the AR-15 or the M16, M4, that whole platform. The receivers are 7075 with Type 3 hard anodized, and they're running a steel, bolts inside the upper receiver, for instance, just sliding on that thing with a little bit of lube, and that it's a legitimate bearing surface. So now you can eliminate the use of bronze bushings or any of that in there, because you can rub it right on. In fact, ProTech does the same thing. They were running the 7075 frames with the Type 3, and you don't need this other you don't need the bushings and things like this. The advantage of that too is you're not having to chase your there's not stacking tolerances the same. There are advantages to doing it that way if you can. But with titanium, I mean, you could PVD coat it and get some kind of thing. It's not the same. You're venturing into an area that hasn't been tested as well as the Type 3 over the aluminum has been in the firearm industry. So it just doesn't make sense to make. We're gonna make the thing way more expensive in titanium. It's going to be heavier without any real benefit. It would look cool. It would be super cool. That's and that's a thing to itself. I mean, I can see a thing flame striped like a Strider and all. I say it'd be awesome. And you could probably pocket it out to get the weight down, and that sort of thing. But it's like, sometimes the best materials, you just have to go with the best for the application. And in this application, for this knife, in my opinion, it was the 7075. And because I would have used titanium, I didn't care at the time. I would have used whatever, but that was the one that checked all the boxes. And it's kind of an aside, but it is.
I love that. Yeah, I love that because anytime we get designers on here, I always want to ask, like, what is something you wish customers knew about your designs? Because that sort of stuff that you just dropped, that knowledge, I think that is it's like not easy to intuit. You can just think like, oh, why didn't they just use these materials? Well, so much went into it, and that's not really something that you can see from a product page or just like picking up the knife. So super appreciate that deep totally dive true. There.
The number of things that are thought of. I mean, it's like, if you say, why is this way? There's an answer. Why is this contour there? There's an answer. I'm telling you, everything about that knife has an answer. It's the way it is for a reason. And that's the other thing. I mean, that thing sort of showed up out of nowhere to a lot of people, fully formed. But there were a lot of iterations and things in between that nobody sees. And by the time you present something, you didn't see the development. So poof, something shows up. It's like, what the heck? But it. In my little skunk works here, there was a lot of.
It's a nonstop process.
Yeah, it is, and it's circuitous too. It's not a direct line. It's like you say, well, I have this end result in mind. Well, you have kind of a vague idea of where you want to get, And then you're starting from here, and you don't know, it's not a direct line. You're going to be doing one of these, and that's why it takes things like 4 years to develop this thing I just handed off. It's not that there weren't solutions before that. It's that you could sort of intuit, you could feel that there was more, that I'm leaving something on the table. This arrangement could be better. This geometry could be more advantageous, whatever. And you just keep pushing until it just doesn't speak to you that way anymore. It just doesn't. In fact, when I was doing the provoke, there was a change I was going to make. It was all done just like this. And I actually started up a whole nother set of files, and I was going to make this particular change. And as I was making the change, I was just, I could feel the difference. It's like, no, it's done. It's just done. It's everything about all the little things about it were so satisfactory to me. It was like, we got to leave it alone. Anything else I'll be importing would be not really. It'd be different, but it wouldn't be better.
I kind of have a follow-up question from what Bernard said and what you just elaborated on. Like, from a designer and knife maker's perspective, what is then like the one thing you look for in other people's knives? Like, what do you look for in? Do you have like a particular insight now that you know like how the sauce is made, basically how the sausage is made? Is there anything you're particularly looking for when you're like examining other people's knives, or like when you're talking with other knife makers? Do you latch onto like, oh, the tolerances of that are perfect, or like, is there anything from your inside as a knife maker yourself? Is there anything you kind of like zone in on, or like kind of geek out about for other people's designs?
Sure. Well, having done handmade customs and stuff for such a long time, of course, that appreciation for the pain of getting things just right. And it is pain. I mean, it's hard. It's like the difference between a really good custom, a really good production knife and a handmade custom, if that's on point. An average person might not really appreciate it, and it might not even be suitable for most people who are going to go beat up a knife. But if you've been exposed to the stuff and you know what it takes to get there, and you know how the appreciation and the joy you get from having something that good is
you can't go back.
No, well, you can't. Except, I mean, I could appreciate like I have my custom, one of these, and these are harder to find now, and they're really, really good. I mean, these we bled over these things, and they're awesome. I carry a Provoke if I'm going to carry one of these,
right?
And it's because it's 90 high 90% the same, and it does the job. It's awesome. Very happy with it, and it's not so expensive. It's not so valuable. I only have like a couple of those, so I'm not going to take it out and let it get scratched and stuff like this. It has a place, right? Some guys do use them though, and I get pictures back from the original Kickstarter guys sometimes every now and then. Some stuff went to the action, went to the theater, and they're sending me pictures of these things. And I'll tell you what, when those things get worn, they're worn with honest use. They're pretty. It's pretty awesome. It's not like Cerakoted to look use. I mean, it's just this beautiful wear all over the thing. It's like it's awesome. But
like where their glove, where their hands were on, like the exact wear of their fingers and everything.
Really, where things have been rubbing, against, when it was moving around, just over time. You can't replicate it really. I mean, you can try, but when it's honest wear, it's the thing of beauty. But the and those are the customs. A lot of those ended up in that world, people using them, and which again is also gratifying. But more to the point of your question, I look. The first thing I'm looking for is how the thing's executed, because that's where I come from. I like stuff that's like, and I'm looking for the action and how it works and things like this. If it's something that's super cool, which you run into every now and then, some new concept, and that's a different hat that gets put on. And a lot of times I'm just looking for. I don't know. It's more visceral. You can kind of intuit if it's something that would help me. Is this something that appeals to me because it solves a problem to me, or it's just so cool, or whatever it is. And sometimes I'll see something that's kind of cool, but it just doesn't touch me. It doesn't reach. You'll see a solution. Sometimes you'll see a solution. Sometimes you see perfectly good solutions to things that questions that I haven't asked, I don't really relate to. I can't relate to the question, and that's fine. It's perfectly cool, because for somebody out there, it probably does. But to me, it's more like I want to see. I don't know. It's really hard to tell. It's hard to tell what it is that's going to ring the bell. And to me, it's I'll see something. The one thing that does stand out though, relative to what we were talking about before, is solutions that don't put the ball down the field. I'll see that stuff, and that's a lot of it. A lot of times there'll be something that's novel, and it adds more complexity and doesn't add a lot of value. So, because everything's a trade-off. You could say, oh, well, we could improve this little bit, and it's going to give you this little benefit, but then you're kind of giving up a lot of elegance or a lot of simplicity, or you got a lot of parts, and now you got a lot, and that drives me crazy. That it makes me cringe, because it's
so
not
probably an easier question to answer then. Has there anything lately, maybe in the past few years, that has truly wowed you in terms of like gear or knives or anything in particular that really stands out? Like when you saw them, like, oh my God, this is magic. This is just, the execution is just,
Well, one that took me by surprise actually recently, and it's not that it's like magic, but it struck me, it hit me well, was Booth's new auto. That happens to be by CRKT. They're making it. They're making it in the US. Hogue is making them, and Magna Cut Steel and all that stuff. And I think that all just adds even more coolness to it. But that action, excuse me, that action is so cool. For it's a scale frame release. I don't know how you really quantify the thing, but it's opposite the direction you would expect. So it's really more from the heel of your hand, and it's just so cool, and it's executed so well. And I was playing with that thing. That was my favorite thing at SHOT this year.
Yeah, me too. So I gave that this year's award for the award that I gave you before, most innovative, because wow. So this, by the way, this is the CRKT Mitrica. We can have our producer put on some footage that I shot when.
I got one right here. If you want to, if it helps. If you got one in there.
Yeah.
Let me grab if you want to play with it or no.
I am actually still trying to imagine, because I haven't held it in hand myself. I'm still trying to imagine how it actually works.
Yeah. So
like press the button to scale.
You just it's a switchblade, but it's like the action's from behind. So it's like if you can see it, here we go. When you just place them this way, it goes.
Yeah.
Oh.
It is so subtle.
Yes, it is very subtle, and it comes from behind here, and it's also the lock. So to disengage the lock, it's all very. I really like this thing. I think this thing's a lot of fun. And plus, I think another big plus of it is the execution. I mean, Hogue's doing a great job with these, and it's got the good steel. It's a winner, and it checks a lot of boxes for me. I think this thing's a lot of fun.
Very cool. So I had a follow-up question, because we're kind of talking about products, and you call some of them solutions, and you gave us so much of your design philosophy. But then I'm wondering, as a designer, like how much do aesthetics play a role in your designs? Because it sounds like, at least the way you're describing the process, it's like you want the execution and the functionality and the utility and the value to be there and make sense. But then I don't know how much of that's like it needs to look a certain way too, and like in a way that speaks to you. Sure. So how does that factor in for you?
Oh, it's pretty big too, because I mean, people don't want to admit it, but humans are aesthetic creatures. We respond to aesthetics. People say, "No, I just care about function." It's just not true. You could prioritize function over aesthetics. That's great. That's fine. Mm-hmm. But the aesthetics are important, and they shouldn't contradict. You don't make functional compromises for aesthetics. Good design. You shouldn't be compromising function. They should marry and progress each other. For instance, one of the things about the Karambit, there's the functional aspect and there's the aesthetic aspect, and to me, a great deal of effort went into having it to be an aesthetic object, closed and open.
Yes,
and it has to pay off. It's one thing for an action to be cool, but that thing needs to pay off aesthetically too, because it's speaking something. It's reflecting the owner and the user as well in subtle ways. Mm-hmm. It has to, in this case, it has function being closed because of its form, and where it fits. Mm-hmm. And then when it's open, it also, the way the contours work, they just happen. It seems like they just happen to be there, but they are not. There's nothing that's not been considered on this.
Right.
The pay, it pays off aesthetically too. It has good movement. It does a lot of aesthetic movement. It has a lot of aesthetic. And here's a good example. I remember early on when they were considering design, there were little details like this, and then you'll see this even in the cheap ripoffs of it. They carry this design cue over, but it has a reason. And that's this little how this little contour works inside here. It's a little cavity almost, and even the cheap copies will at least echo that, which I think is kind of funny. And of course that's not a cheap copy. That's the Provoke engravery. But in this case, that existed because it became kind of a feature of it. There's a couple reasons for it. Now, from an aesthetic perspective, if you want to get into that, you have let's see, I need something to point with, for lack of a better tool. So you have
another knife. Oh, okay.
No. This is this
little
cool thing. I found this somewhere. This little nipper guy, and it's from Germany. Yeah. It's super cool, and the construction of it's like spectacular, actually. But anyway, it just happens to be sitting here. So I have this. You'll have, if you just consider like how this whole shape flows, the angle of this line as it goes down kind of reintroduces, this. See, it sort of echoes the general plane of the blade.
Oh yeah.
It could go any which way. It's there for a functional purpose. It's lightening the part dramatically because I wanted the meat of that part to be as coplanar with between the pivots as I could. So I'm not going to take that out of the back. I'm going to take it out of the front. It also adds a little bit of tactile aggression there. I mean, you can. It gives it's not without sort of like a grip benefit. It's not huge, but it is some.
There's some purchase there.
There is, and but yeah, it's there for practical reasons, but its form and even the angle, the lower part of this as compared to the upper part of this, it's sort of tying it. It's trying to echo, trying to force a line visually that I want to be forced. If that's not there, I'd be able to. If I didn't have one that showed that angle down and that aggressive attitude in just that one little part, it would make more sense if I had one that wasn't that way. But as it is, it's like I'm just pulling the aesthetic gravity along with the blade. It's communicating in some way, aesthetically, and you don't even pick that stuff up. This is stuff things you don't even consider when you're. But there's lots of little stuff in these things. So from that perspective, the aesthetics are important. Also, how this you'll notice that I can go on all day with these because, like I said, every form of this thing, every curve has a reason. But why this arm is actually higher on one side than it is the frame? Why when it's open, it's a little higher. There is some aesthetics to that in terms of bringing that line down again, but of course most of it has to do with the fact that this is your main interaction with how this blade is opening. So you wouldn't want to go
pressing
completely flush. So it has the function of being there, but it's also being incorporated as part of the aesthetic. So it's like there's a lot of everything's got two functions.
Fine balance,
and it has to do something that I want it to do beyond just be there. If that makes sense.
Wow. Yeah, no, I really appreciate that explanation. Super intentional and deliberate with the design decisions there that are, to me, and like I look at knives a lot and like I handle all this stuff and I even like, love that knife so much. And I'm just like, this is all new to me. It's like almost imperceptible, but it makes sense. And it's hard to imagine it without it. So that's very cool. And as you're explaining that, I'm thinking like, you're not just designing a knife, you're designing like 3 knives at once, basically. It's like when it's closed, when it's open, and in the motion of doing it. That's, when you think about it that way, like your job is hard.
Also, that's another thing, since you mentioned it was closed, you'll notice the character of that particular cut, which has to be there for functional, well, in my opinion, had to be there for functional reasons, mostly weight. You notice how it echoes the cutout in here. You'll see if I can get that. There's almost like a chevron. It doesn't have to be that way, but at least it kind of speaks to itself. It kind of looks like it's a design feature that's intentional, and both those things are there for their own functional purposes. Yep, both are there for their own functional purposes, but they kind of, when it's closed, they kind of come together in an intentional way. And like I said, there's tons of that in this thing.
I like to describe the Provoke when I was handling one of the earlier versions. Like it's kind of like almost organic with how cleanly the lines like shifted from one to the other, both when open and when closed. And like, yeah, kind of geeking out about how you were describing how that particular section there also
Yep.
comes into the notch of the pivot of this
Yep.
arm here. I love it. Like all of these design elements and like keeping the line into the hawkbill shape itself
Yep.
from these lines there. Yeah. So it's like have anybody try and recreate something similar and have it function also aesthetically, both from a closed and an open position. That's kind of crazy.
Yeah,
You
it
are
was.
really functioning in a higher plane than clearly most of us. Yeah.
It's subconscious. A lot of this stuff people they can appreciate, they like or they don't like, but they aren't thinking about it, in a way that's articulatable. They're feeling it. It's a good example. I think the best example of this is Ken Onion. Ken Onion sold more knives with Ken Onion's hand on it than anybody else. I mean, he's, if you were to calculate how many pockets Ken Onion designs have been in, it's probably more than any other single maker. I wouldn't be surprised combined. It's probably many combined. But he's got designs that are 20 years old or whatever out there, and they still top sellers. And why is it that in a knife store or wherever a customer's going to go, and they're not saying, "Oh, it's a Ken Onion knife, I have to have it." They're seeing it compared with other knives, many other knives, and yet why is that one getting picked more commonly than the others? Now, it didn't hurt that they had the speed safe thing go on, so that feature was attached to that knife and all that stuff. But now that that stuff's all out there, it's still that's at play. There are these intangibles, or they seem intangible. It seems like it's intangible. It seems like it's not a concrete reason, but it's people responding to something that he's doing.
Yeah.
And,
it's intuitive.
It is. Things speaking to them, and they're relating with the design. And there were a lot of things that I remember. A little piece of design advice, if you like to geek out on that stuff. There was a thing that Ken was doing that was that I said, I got to do that. In fact, you see a lot of that when I was doing this knife. This knife has a lot of interesting design stuff in it too, in terms of the aesthetic and why things are. A lot of things that were kind of painful to do, like it has a really pronounced distal taper. It might not be able to see it here, but it's thicker here than it is here, and that distal taper is in the titanium scales as they titanium frame. From one end to the other, it's thicker. Each handle half is thicker here than it is here, and getting everything to flow. That has a lot to do with the fact that things inherently kind of chunky, and so when it's open, it has this
balance.
Having it just it keeps it from being brick like. It has a little more more elegance, like a lot more elegance, and you're losing some weight that you don't need there anyway. I mean, you could pocket it out, but kind of brutal. But anyway, the design, a lot of people have considered their elements and have picked out accurately some of the elements. I have to go back to why it is that way. So I was having this conversation with Ken once, and he was saying one of the techniques he was using what had to do with immersion, like in the art and in the architecture and in the if there's a design element or a feel, for lack of a better word, a design sensibility from a particular period or particular artist or whatever it is, you would study their stuff. You would sort of immerse yourself in that world, and then when you go to design, it kind of creeps into what you're doing. And at the time, I think, I hope you wouldn't mind me mentioning this. I don't think he does. I think he's actually talked about it. If you remember a few years ago, he had the Ripple and the Eros and some of those like really thin frame locks, and they had very particular design elements that were very characteristic. Well, he'd done that. He was looking at things from various art and architecture backgrounds. Well, in this one, I decided I liked the aesthetic, sort of the 30s to 70s aerospace kind of feel, and also the architecture. You're looking a little Art Deco, but not just Art Deco, more functional, like things you would see in wrench and other hand tool designs, not only from that period, but even from before. Some of these things kind of pull in some of these design sensibilities, for lack of a better term. And the EDX definitely had a lot to do with that. I mean, a lot of the stuff kind of came in from those. I mean, the way some of these contours are, the way it tapers, kind of it's minimalist. It is kind of minimalist, at least from a functional standpoint. It only has a few parts. I mean, it has the handle halves. It has it has the lock bar, which is also the clip, and it has a blade. And it's not a lot of parts, but how they all go together. You know, it's got oversized. You know, the thumb studs at the time in 2009 or so were dramatically oversized. Now you're seeing some stuff in that range, but it was they're also the stop pins. You know, so it's all kind of like it's kind of brutal, and it has a very satisfying presence when it opens. And but really the overall the form and aesthetic was not really accidental. So I did that. I had covered my bases looking at searching and actually copying and down onto my computer and just observing things like these old wrenches, tools that related to aerospace, even some aerospace forms, but mostly the tools and the architecture of airframes and things like this. Also buildings, furniture, postmodern architecture, this sort of thing. And just it all kind of gets you thinking along certain lines. And
inspiring art.
Yeah, it kind of creeps in on you. I thought it was an interesting exercise. I didn't do that with the Karambit, but the Karambit kind of advised itself. But I think being able to be aware of these things that do influence you are, it's pretty wild.
So I like how you're talking about inspirations. Did you get any inspiration from almost 2 decades of writing as Moto Joe to influence your your career as a knife maker?
Yeah, I don't know if it really applied. I think when you write, I didn't become a writer because I like to write. I did not like it at all. I didn't like writing. I liked having written. And there was also a radio show that we were doing for a bunch of years through there, where I was just a kind of a co-host, and we were doing a lot of that stuff. The thing about the writing is it's very mechanical, and the logic in order to write well is significant. And a lot of people don't even exercise these things. But I had a benefit. I didn't go to school for it. I was doing more art, and then. But I loved the motorcycles, and I was in that world I was around all these moto journalists and stuff like this. And they're like, "Hey, you have this little thing. Why don't you write?" And I'm like, "No, so they prevailed upon me. I don't know how." And I did some little thing, and it was probably terrible. And they would sit down with me, and some of these guys who had names in the business, and we'd go over everything line for line, word for word. And I was a high school student at the time, and we of course didn't have any concept how to write. And it was terrible. So over the course of time, this is the way it was. As soon as I was out of high school, I went to work at one of the national, or the trade motorcycle related magazines, and one of my mentors was the editor there. And man, for a year, it was line for line, word for word, painful, and learning logic and syntax and all this stuff. It's like you don't. Having it become second nature is the thing. Just to be able to read and proof. You don't have time to be thinking about it. You're not writing the great American novel. You're trying to communicate things that are to the point and elegant and fast. And you're not trying to be write some great prose. But there's a mechanical aspect to it that is, and logic to it. It's almost like math. It's kind of related to math, to me in my mind. And you're able to, communicate effectively and easily, then you can actually bring in some sensitivity. When you control the tools, then what you do naturally, since now you can communicate effectively, you
Style
can import
comes
some,
in after.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You can import some personality and stuff. But it was about a year of just painful going over everything, and we until they finally were like, okay, this is good enough. And then I found myself shortly thereafter becoming the editor of that particular magazine, which I did not want. And it was more responsibility and no more money.
Yeah.
And it was good for the resume, but other than that, it was a different thing. But I love motorcycles. I mean, in particular, I was completely obsessed. I'm probably a little less obsessed now, but I still love them. But then I was eat, breathe, drink, sleep motorcycles. How do you get better? How do you get faster? How do you become top tier? And it was a lot of fun. I enjoyed that. I'm not involved in that world pretty much at all professionally anymore.
Yeah,
I have some friends still that are, but But after a while, I went freelance to make, complete the story. And I was doing all my stories for a number of years, kind of remote. But you get pretty good at doing what you're doing, right? If you do it over time. So I ended up with a lot of free time, and that's how I ended up playing with pattern welding. 1995-ish, 94, something in that range. I started pattern welding. There wasn't a lot on it at the time. There were a lot of books. There was no internet. There was no YouTube or any of that. And so it was a lot of it's trial and error in a condo garage with a little homemade forge and a
Could you briefly explain what that is, pattern welding, for people who might not know? Yeah.
Well, a lot of people refer to the end result as damascus steel.
Right.
And it's the combining of one or more, or two or more ferrous materials, grades of steel, but not always ferrous. I mean, some people were playing with nickel and things like that with it too. And your pattern weld, you're welding it in a forge. So it's more of a eutectic kind of a bond than you get from, like, if you're using like a torch and a stick, and then you're melting material and you're flowing a stick in there. That's one kind of welding. This doesn't do that. This is you're bringing two usually flat pieces of material together that are clean, hopefully, and you're heating it up to 20, I think 6, somewhere in that range, 28. Maybe 20 is a little high, and then when you hit it, not particularly hard either. When you hit it with the correct force, it welds. It bonds across the length of that space if it's done right. And then that material can be drawn out. You have many layers that can be drawn out, twisted, and you do all kinds of things to it. And I had focused on swords, Viking swords in particular, because it was a really tough. That's a tough genre. It involves a lot of very difficult type of pattern welding. You're doing multiple bars that are twisted, oftentimes twisted and then not twisted to be traditional in different ways. And then those are lined up with twisted and untwisted sections, and that's welded together. And then you have a separate edge that goes around that. That's usually it could be homogeneous, but it could also be a pattern welded billet. And then that's a very difficult piece of welding if you think about, something that's 32 inches long, and you can only weld a few inches at a time, and all of the fouling you're getting from the forge. It's a very, very challenging thing, which is why I did it so long. I found it extremely challenging, and I did numerous swords, but it's one of those high risk things. You start the earliest pieces of it are the easiest, and it gets harder as you go, and you have more time involved, so you're more likely to end up with problems later on or discover them at the very, very end. And that's, it's just brutal to do it well. It's rough.
Okay. I have a follow-up question to that. So I've kind of like gone down this YouTube rabbit hole and watched a whole lot of Forged in Fire episodes and stuff like that. And I also come from a country of knife makers, and I see their process sometimes. And I've talked to some of the makers here. If there is anybody interested in starting to get into knives, do you have any like starting tips, or from that perspective? Do you have from your long experience since 1995, starting in pattern welding? Somebody wants to become a knife maker in 2024. What do you think is the best piece of advice you can give them if they're interested in going down that path? Maybe
Mikey wants to make a knife. I think that's what's happening.
Let's not
run. Turn away. Turn back before it's too late. No. Yeah. Well, this is the thing. What kind of it kind of depends what you were trying to achieve. If you want to make folders, or you want to make fixed blades, forged knives, there's a lot to consider about what your end goals are, and they don't have to always be laid out up front. Like, I was forging for a long time before I decided out of the blue to start doing folders and mechanical things. The most mechanical things I was getting my mechanical fix by building tools like presses and one-off type stuff that I got to use, which I kind of enjoyed, and that involved having to learn a bunch of stuff about hydraulics or pneumatics or whatever it is. And you say, well, I need to make this tool. Well, it involves this kind of thing. They got to learn about how to engineer.
Is that why I have a giant CNC right beside you? Just learning.
Well, the CNC is right over on this side. What you can't see is a 1925 little giant power hammer, and right next to it's a forging press, which I built probably 20 years ago. And
nice.
Excuse me, it's kind of funny that they be in such close proximity. If you think about it, I mean, totally different worlds.
The old way and the new way, yeah.
Yeah, oh, completely. And what's weird is I guess I'm kind of unique because I've done both. You know, I can use CNC
Yeah.
and I can do the pattern welding. And a lot of guys will do one or the other, or they'll specialize in one and dabble in the other, kind of a thing, or vice versa. And yeah, it's when it comes to advice to somebody who's starting, if you just want to start making just your basic knives, like fixed blade knives, the easiest way to do it is, of course, stock removal. You're gonna be grinding knives. You're going to be grinding. You're going to be sketching out your designs. You're going to be transferring it to the steel, and you're going to grind it on a nice belt grinder. And that's the easiest, most direct path. Fixed blade knives are kind of hard to mess up. You can have other people heat treat them and do a really, really good job, so you don't have to get immediately into the heat treat yet. Though eventually you'll want to be able to, especially if the blades start getting long, because you're not going to send a sword to Peters. The things you need to do with sword length pieces too. I mean, you're gonna have to learn, about the nuances of heat treating, and it's not, you have to learn about isothermal transformation charts and how to plot a heat treat path to get to the results you want. And it's not something you can, in my opinion, it's not something you're going to hand off to somebody. You're going to get something back, and it's not going to be what you want. It'll be a little warped. It'll be, it won't. Excuse me. It won't be what you expect. And when you have 1,000 hours in something, you're not really going to be willing to send that thing off anyway. It's like, it comes back in two pieces, and that stuff can happen. But when it comes to smaller knives with some of the modern alloys, especially some of these high performance stainless, you absolutely send it to Peters and stuff like that. Send it to Boss, whoever's doing some stuff that you can actually verify this is a high performance heat treat. In fact, when I had always done my own heat treating on all the carbon steel stuff, and I had 4 salt pot heat treaters, and we were doing all this stuff. We had sword length ones, short knife ones. But when I started doing some of the stainless for value purposes on, let's see, here's an example of one of those other EDCs. When I started doing these, this was the first thing that I did that I didn't insist on making the steel for. So this Damascus blade is, or pattern roller blade is Damas steel. And in 2005, Damas steel, not a lot of people really knew too much about them. And but on the charts, it was a great material. And I said, if I'm going to be processing 30 meters of that stuff, I want it to be uniform. I want it to be, something that is going to be able to check the boxes for the customer. Because at this point, you start thinking not about an ego trip about I made that steel, I made this, I made that. I'm trying to say how can I deliver the highest value to the customer, and I wasn't doing stainless steel heat treating or not stainless steel forging. So at the time, the heir apparent was the Damas steel, and it was a good material. The other things like, your priorities have to change. This was a really hard one for me, having built everything in the shop. When you're forging stuff and you're swinging a hammer, and it's all about you. But this is where it starts changing. It's less about you and more about the guy who's carrying it, and how do you deliver the best value, the most bang for the buck. If that means having somebody else machine a part that you can't do in-house cost effectively, then that's what you do. It's just the priorities change, and sole authorship is great, and guys who are doing that stuff. It's just I was making that change right around this, where it's like where I want it to be is not where I can get it alone in terms of cost, and just being viable. So so I don't know if that makes a lot of sense, but could I make this knife entirely in-house? Yes. But I did make the EDX all in-house. The ones that we did here, this was all in-house except for the heat treat. Oh, and that's where we're going with the heat treat. It's like when I started going to stainless heat treat, I would send that out, because when it comes to a sword and stuff, it has to be right. Pretty much, if you know what you're looking at, you can tell by the characteristics of the thing if it's in the ballpark. But if you know by the charts, you can know exactly what it is on the TTD charts. But when it comes to the stainless stuff, it's a part of giving more value. What matters on a knife blade? The material, but its condition is just as important as the material. And people don't get it. It's like, I got this really great piece of MagnaCut, but it wasn't heat treated in such a way that is chips. Getting the most out of it. it's not correct for its application, or it's too soft. And this was seen a bunch of years ago when some of the bigger manufacturers were getting into some more exotic materials, but they were heat treating some of the stuff down in like 57, 58 Rockwell. And it's like, this material is happiest at 61. You know, it's like, you're not getting what you want. So people think, oh, that material stinks. It's like, well, you didn't get it in the right condition. And that kind of matters. I would rather have a quote unquote lesser material that's optimally heat treat than a boutique material that isn't. So it's kind of because then you're just bragging about it, but you're not getting the performance you're paying for. So in this case, I when I made that transition to not be doing all the heat treat, all the stuff in house for the stainless stuff, I used Boss at first, Paul Boss, and then when he stopped doing it, it was Peters, and they're both spectacular. And there's others who can do that stuff too. But the nice thing there is when you put their little logo on there, you know that thing is
verified,
exactly what
certified.
Exactly what you specified. You know, down to half a Rockwell point, and it's just.
So that's another thing that's like, for our audience, one of those things you don't really think of when you're early on in collecting or not really deep into the rabbit hole of knives as well. Like, heat treatment is really, really, like, for flashlight guys, it's like the tint, right? Like getting that perfect rosy tint. But for the knife guys, it's like perfect angles, perfect action, perfect heat treatment. Like when it's put to the test, it's not going to chip. It's going to keep its edge. Like all of those little nuances that you're not really thinking about at first, but then
blade geometry.
And that takes to tie what you said earlier, it takes you from a 9 to a 10, right? It's a difference between something that you can get like general production knife, but then to get it to 10, to get it to 11, it's those nuances. It's that like one extra point of HRC that makes the metal sing, like have it be at its optimal level, right?
Exactly. No, that's exactly right. It is.
Kind of reminds me of if you're getting like Kobe beef or like Wagyu or something, and then you just like nuke it in the microwave. It's like you're not doing it justice. Yeah, right? Yeah.
Oh, that hurts.
Sorry.
Wounded.
I really like this, what you were elaborating about, different knife makers helping each other, different makers collaborating and creating the perfect end product, right? I heard this story about how chefs, they don't let each other pay at each other's restaurants. Like they invite over a fellow chef and like, oh, you got to try all of my latest, even if it's like the highest end 3 Michelin star restaurant. Is there a tradition like that among you knife makers as well? Do you like a SHOT Show or whatever, or USN? Do you like trade knives and like, here, take this, see what it's like, give me any feedback? Do you have like a tradition like that?
I don't know if you'd call it a tradition. It happens sometimes.
Okay.
I've given knives and I've received knives, and I think one cool thing that I've noticed in my experience anyway, when it comes to knife makers, is there isn't a lot of, even though technically I guess we're competing against each other, you don't get that sense. It's like, I'm not competing with Gavin Hawk. I like Gavin. He does great stuff, and he makes just some top tier stuff, you know, and he's a buddy, and I appreciate him. And yet some people say, well, you're kind of we're not doing the same thing, you know, and even if we were, it wouldn't matter. I mean, if I had something to offer to him, some piece of advice or something, if he could find it useful, I would give it to him in a second, and vice versa. If he says, hey, Caswell, you know, there's this thing, you know, about this thing, and maybe you might want to think about doing it this way, I would totally receive that. You know, I mean, same thing with Onion and any of these guys. And
unless somebody was straight ripping you off, of course.
right. Well, exactly. But you see, you don't see a lot of that, at least not among the knife makers that I've seen. I guess there might be some people could point to and say, oh, that guy's a crook or whatever. I haven't encountered it, thank goodness. Among the people that I've been fortunate enough to be around, and it's much more collegial and helpful. It's like there's something I'm going to help somebody and say, oh, you know, I found this to be the case. You know, it'll save you tons of time if you just consider it. I will give that advice, and I'd love to have that kind of advice given back, and I have. So like that thing we were talking about with Onion and the design thing, we were shooting the breeze and we were talking about that stuff. It's an interesting. There is that kind of relationship. I think we haven't really seen. It's a good group of people. I mean, I guess there probably is some predatory practice that goes on here and there, but I especially among individual makers, I haven't seen a lot. I haven't encountered it. Thank goodness.
So I love that sort of collaborative spirit, and you guys are kind of helping each other out. And it's great to get feedback from people of that caliber that you're surrounding yourself with, right? So I think that is very valuable, But instead of this collaborative spirit, let's talk really quickly about a competitive spirit, because I hear that you're into fencing. How does that happen? Do you just like make enough swords that one day you're like, you know what, I need to win some matches with something like this?
No, fencing came in. I was 27, so I came in kind of late, and I'm 54 now. I don't know how that happened because I was 27 yesterday, but somehow here we are. But when I was 27, I started fencing, and I remember I was doing a lot of kind of competitive stuff with the motorcycles. That's a little more competitive. I mean, you're either fast or you're not. You're either crashing or you're not. You got to be running. You have to be fast and not crash, and be reliable. People are lending you very expensive things for the for you're doing the journalism, for instance. Some things are not not really even repeatable sometimes, so they're one of a kind stuff. So you got to go fast, but you can't crash that thing. And but you also have to, in your group, if you're the last guy and you're trailing, they're waiting for you. Nobody's gonna say anything, but everyone knows. And you
have the walk of shame at the end.
Oh yeah, well it's there. Nobody's gonna say anything, but you're everyone wants to be riding at a certain level type of thing. And you don't want to be around guys who can't, because they might crash. If they're going to try to keep up and stuff like this, and you see that sometimes too. So there is kind of that. But when I started fencing, I didn't intend to start competing. But of course that occurs. And as you start getting better, and then that's like the next step. What do? Well, you compete, you go to the tournaments.
Yeah.
And I think I imported a lot of the way you think about things from the motorcycles and all that stuff, because I did do pretty well, pretty fast. And pretty fast being a couple years. The way it's there's ratings and things like this based on how you perform in tournaments and things like this. And I was an A within I think the third year I was competing was an A, which is pretty dang fast. And then I had a lot of success in it. I was still kind of old though. I mean, I was competing with some international guys, and we were doing a lot of the local stuff and this sort of thing. But it was like I was kind of too old to be, really chasing it, unless I want to do veterans. But then I had time to wait for veterans. And then when I became 40, it was like, who wants to be the king old guy?
Yeah.
I still fence, and people still bug me. I fence a couple times a week, and some of these guys are still. They'll say, "Hey, why don't you compete, man?" And it's just like because then I'd have to start running again. I'd have to start eating better. I'd have to start, doing all these things, which I know it takes to be at a high level.
An athlete, yeah.
Oh, I'd have to be training more, and that was one of the things I started noticing too. Is the level of training I was doing. I was doing, 20 hours a week of hard stuff of fencing, and then there was another maybe 7 hours that I wouldn't consider. It was a little lower level, messing around. But I noticed that my joints stopped being too happy about it all of a sudden, and then they would get injured and things like this. Then you'd be out for a while, and it's like I know where you have to be, and to be winning consistently and scaring everybody. And it's like, well, if I'm not going to be there, if I'm going to have to start compromising that, I don't. That's when I stopped. I stopped competing in 2006, and I'm just going to kind of just tormenting people.
Yeah,
just show up at clubs and stuff now from since then.
Yeah, can I ask, when it comes to fencing, like, what do you enjoy about it most?
Oh man, it's a great sport. I wish I had discovered it earlier. There's a lot. There's a lot. I don't find that there's anything that'll get as much of a workout. I will never push myself physically like I will when I'm fencing. I'll go way on. You'll start seeing stars and things like this, and mostly because your mind's occupied with the game, with what's going on, you want to keep going, even though the body's going, maybe you shouldn't. And then that becomes a thing where you have to listen to that when you're competing and moderate and try to restrain yourself.
Don't tunnel vision.
Yeah, for the future bouts, for the future things, you can't just go full blast the whole time. You have to moderate a bit, but you have to still win. So it becomes there are other considerations that come into play with that. But just in general, when you're fencing, I mean, like running or riding a bike or something like that. For me, my mentality, that's just it doesn't engage, and I'm kind of quick twitch anyway, and that plays good into shooting, but also the fencing, where I wouldn't want to run. I was a good sprinter as a kid. I didn't want to do long distance, Okay. So, and fencing's kind of that way. It's all on, and then there's nothing. Then all on. So that was well suited to me physically. So yeah, it's a great sport. I like the mental game and I like the physical game. I like, man, like I say, I wish I got to it maybe 10 years earlier than I did. It would have been great.
Everything you're saying, by the way, I feel like that with bouldering, with rock climbing.
Oh,
I
yeah.
kind of started that late, and I enjoy the mental, I enjoy the physical, and how it pushes you to get just that much better. But you have to be careful of like injuries and overdoing it.
That's right.
There's like expression of your style involved, and all of that. So very cool.
It is. Yeah. It's cool, and it's funny how those things are kind of connected. I mean, it's like even you say that's bouldering, or even the motorcycles have to do with fencing and have to do with things that. How you get good at anything is kind of the same. It seems it's like it's connected. Mm-hmm.
I have a quote I like. How you do one thing is how you do everything. Yeah. I really like that quote. Yeah. That really resonated.
It's so true. Yeah. There's a certain amount of discipline. There's a certain amount of joy you have to get from it, or you won't do it. In fact, in fencing, one of the things I had run into with some of my coaches that they would see happen is a lot of times the guy with the most talent isn't the guy who's going to be the champion. And a lot of times it's because they become disinterested. They can do it, they can achieve it, and they don't have to work. They don't have to invest anything. It just comes
in the work anymore.
It becomes easy. So they come and everyone's like, "Oh my gosh, you're so great!" And they just kind of go off because it doesn't challenge them. They aren't interested. They go to do things that maybe they aren't quite so talented at, but it interests them. It's a weird thing, but that seems to be a something that plays out.
The whole talent versus work thing, right?
Yeah, it seems to me that talent's important, but more than talent is desire.
Work.
Yeah. Well, desire drives the ability to work.
Yeah.
Because if you don't really want it, you won't put the work in.
And if you do, you'll burn out.
Yeah. Oh, totally.
Yeah. So,
did you ever make your own épée?
Well, actually, I have one over there. No, I haven't made one that I would use or anything. I mean, because it's a sporting equipment. I mean, it's like they're relatively cheap, $100 or something, for a blade, for a good one. I see what I was doing was I wouldn't buy very expensive épées because I was fencing so much. I'd go through about a dozen blades a year and a season. Okay. And so I didn't want like $150, $200 miraging steel, blade that's going to last because it's an electronic. The blade is historically pretty correct. I mean, if you just sharpen the thing, it's a small sword. And the thing is, the business end in the sport is the button at the end, because it has to make it touch. And you want that thing to be fresh and crisp and not crunchy and all that stuff. The blade it has to have certain characteristics, but it becomes more of a vehicle to deliver the point.
A vessel, yeah.
And so what happens there is I discovered that by the time the point is pretty much shot, that blade's getting ready to break. So I didn't really break a lot of blades. That thing would start getting crunchy. I might replace the point or something, get a little more life out of it. And then I would pitch it and just get a whole nother one because I discovered that as soon as you changed everything and you put the money in the new electronics and stuff, then the blade breaks, takes it all out with it. Right. And you're like, so that's why I had a system where I would buy these Russian blades that were all very consistent. They were just consistent. They were relatively light. They had the characteristics I could live with. And I would I wanted uniformity more than special characteristics. As long as that thing's the same, I can adjust to it. Yeah. Right. So, because if a blade's going to fail, you're going to fail at the end of the day, the round of 2, gold medal bout or whatever, and you're down there, and it's 3 or 4 points to go, and you're behind 2, and you're just like, then your blade's what's wrong with this thing? And when you go to pick another one up and submit it for testing, you want it to be exactly like the last one, except working. Yes. You don't want to pick up that's right, this is the wobbly one, or this one has that other characteristic that I have to. Yeah. You don't have the time. You want it to be exactly the same every time. And and as you get better, I mean, you could pick up and fence with anything, but when you're fencing at a higher level, little things matter, and all that little stuff kind of comes to play.
Okay, so we've talked about your knife designing. We've talked about motojournalism. We've talked about fencing. You're just doing it all. But a common thread that we see where you focus your creativity and your artistry, you've said at some point, has been communication through all of these things, right? So what do you think is the message Joe as a designer or Joe as a person wants to communicate with the world?
Oh, wow. now here's a question for you.
I like getting philosophical on this show.
Wow.
We talk about gear all the time, but sometimes I want to know about the person.
The thing that comes to mind the most, and I never really thought about it in a sense that there's like an underlying theme or message. It's more, I've always thought about it project to project. I wouldn't want to put this into like a quote or anything necessarily, but I think the characteristic that would be great if it was to underlie body of work for your life would have to do with imparting some type of joy through your stuff, through because we all know, being in this world, that there is a certain kind of intangible joy you get from discovering something cool that you want to bring close to yourself, kind of a thing. You can receive joy from things you own. There's all kinds of ways you can enjoy things, but in this case, it's like it has to do with the fun and enjoyment of the possibilities of what you have on you, of tools and what they say about the user personally, because
self-expression.
Yeah, and there's another layer to it, because you could say, well, I'm expressing myself by designing something like this, right? And that's true, but more importantly, anyone who it speaks to is saying something to other people based on possessing it.
Yes.
They're which is it's a weird it's kind of a weird thing to think about from one perspective, but it seems perfectly natural in another. And it's like you're, when you get to something that just kind of rings something in your subconscious, in your core, that kind of
it's Harry Potter getting his wand. It clicks.
Yeah. It's like it is a type of joy. So that's what I have to say. Is the enjoyment, the lark of it all. It's a. I mean, none of this stuff. Some of it you could say it's a need. You got to have it, but really, a lot of these things we do in EDC and all this stuff is accessory. It's helpful. Yes. Sometimes very, very helpful. But a lot of people need $1,000 pocket knife type of a thing. They don't even want it. Or a $200 pocket knife. It seems insane to some people. But to those of us who appreciate some of these things, it's hard to communicate with people, but it is wrapped up in joy.
Yes. No, I think that's a great answer. 100%. And it ties into so much of what we try to express here at everydaycarry.com and the content that we make. And just me and Mikey personally, because we get a lot of people who maybe are just starting their EDC and they'll see something and they'll dismiss something because, it doesn't tick these boxes, or the price tag is like too high. And that's okay. So not everything will work for you. But we're not trying to be so prescriptive in that way. We want to help people discover like this joy that you're talking about for themselves. And it's going to look different for everyone. There's going to be a different journey to get there. But I think, when you're building your EDC and you're finding those pieces that give you that joy, it teaches you something about yourself too, right?
It does.
It does. And I think that is like a great message to be communicated too.
It's fantastic. I love that.
Yeah. So thank you for that answer. Yeah.
Yeah. I have my last question is, you've surrounded yourself with good people and you have decades of experience. You literally have the past on one side and the future of creation on the other side. Is there one thing that you have in your head that you've wanted to build with all of these resources at your disposal? What is one thing that you still want to build for yourself?
For myself?
For yourself.
Oh, geez. I don't know if there's anything. If there was something I really, really wanted to build for myself, I would build it. I would have just built it, because I have.
So the possibilities are out there.
Yeah. Now there is stuff that I play with and I do think about that have nothing to do with EDC necessarily. Well, maybe obliquely, but not really. That involve. Oh man, do I even get into it?
You don't have to.
Well,
if you're legally bound by something.
No. It has nothing to do with anything that we're doing. It's so off the path. I mean, I enjoy stuff that has to do with. I like experimenting with things from like scientific type stuff, and when it comes to, there are some things that I some equipment I'm thinking of buying, and to be able to do some experiments with various things. It has to do with quantum effects and things like this on materials, and it's different. It's kind of a different world. There's some ideas I'd like to chase down, but I don't have some of the equipment that's necessary to really prove it. And it's like that means I'd have to assemble it and learn how to use some of that stuff, how to really get into. But it's a world that's so different than what we're used to here. It's much more the scientific world. But all that stuff boils down to engineering anyway. I mean,
science and engineering.
It is. It's the same. I mean, where does science stop and engineering start? You go to the moon. Is that science or is that engineering?
And there's an art aspect to it also.
I was going to say, yeah.
I mean, they're talking about a lot of engineering. A lot of guys who are making that stuff possible are engineers, and there's a scientific aspect of it because you're testing hypothesis mechanically and you're proofing it and then moving on. It's like this scientific method, but in not theoretical. It's like mechanically doing something. It's related, and the same thing's true with a lot of what we're doing with this stuff. With my popsicle sticks, I mean, it's when all the other stuff we were doing that was so. Will this work? I don't know, drill a whole bunch of holes and stuff, start playing with things and start using your imagination, start thinking deep in there, and you can prove things. That won't work. That won't work. Some things that you think would work, you put it in 3D and second one doesn't work. And so there's a lot of that sort of trial and error, which is kind of similar to a scientific method, which you're supposed to have a hypothesis, test the hypothesis, and try to essentially disprove it. And but it's in this case, like I said, it would be such a divergence from what we're doing, which might be why I find it interesting. I have the capacity, I have the capability to make any apparatus I need, other than beyond certain types. I could actually make some of these other things, but if something already exists, let's say in a piece of equipment, surplus equipment that's 30 years old, and I don't have to make it all here, I'm going to buy the 30-year-old piece of equipment and maybe refurbish it, get it to what I need to do. Now the problem with that kind of thing is it's so speculative that there's no pathway to money directly. It's completely self-indulgent on my part as far as I can tell from that. Is there potential for but odds are pretty high. But it's gratifying just to learn new stuff about
how it sounds like you're exploring a curiosity, and I appreciate that in everything you do. Yeah,
I got some nano particles over here for something we were doing with which
is it fair to conclude that based on everything we talked about today, it's about communication, it's about joy, and with this last answer of yours, it's also about the joy of discovery as well?
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah. In fact, that was something. Oh, that's absolutely correct. In fact, when I was doing when I was transitioning from being a motojournalist to doing the pattern welding, that threw a lot of people for a loop. Because here I have this essentially a career all laid out. I have all the path I could go, all of this stuff, and I'm kind of backing off of that to do this. And it's like, why? Well, to do what? Hammer out some knives? It doesn't make sense. But the fact is that the discovery, especially then, back in those days, it was not easy. There wasn't a lot of books and resources. You had to learn it, and then you got to build your machinery to do it, which is also very exciting in its own way. They're all like little side quests. And it all sort of synergistically works. It's something that can really keep you up at night when you're thinking, if I could just do this, I can do that, and the possibilities are what does it. If everything else is, I'm just going to go to work and write more articles, that was starting to burn me out.
Yeah.
Spoken like a true maker, I think. Spoken like a true maker.
Yeah, it's great that you found that in your career. So that is super cool. Joe, is there anything that we should have asked but didn't, that maybe you want to talk about real quick?
No, you guys are pretty thorough. I appreciate that.
So are you, yeah.
I mean, the what's the word for it? The sensitivity of the questions are well thought out. I mean, I don't know if there's a standard ones that you've worked out for this sort of thing, but
not for this one. This one, we're just going with it.
Pretty insightful. I appreciate that.
I appreciate you.
Well, thank you for the really insightful answers as well. We love nerding out about this stuff, and to be able to talk with someone of your caliber, that's really special for us as well. Yeah.
Well, I appreciate that. You're very kind.
Okay, that just about wraps it up for today's episode. If you made it this far, thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed today's discussion, and if you did, please consider subscribing. And if you're listening through a podcast service and you really enjoy what we do here, please consider leaving a review and a positive rating, as it would really help the show. You can follow us on social media for more content daily on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, and all of that will be linked below. And if you want to be part of our EDC community, feel free to hop into our Facebook group or Discord server for more real-time discussion with other EDCers. Lastly, if you have any feedback for us or questions you want answered on the show, you can shoot us an email at podcast@everydaycarry.com. Thank you so much for listening to Carry the Way. I'm Bernard.
And I'm Mikey.
I'm Joe Caswell. As a guest.
Awesome. And until the next one, peace.